PRFAQ stands for Press Release and Frequently Asked Questions. Press release is not really a marketing tool. It is a tool to describe a vision. So you write a press release as if the future was already here. I worked at Microsoft for 7 years, and for 18 years, I founded and worked on many startups. And 3 years ago, I joined Amazon. I really fell in love with this PRFAQ framework. So when I left Amazon, I decided to write a book about it.
What are some important stuffs, the main sections of PRFAQ?
The PRFAQ is a written document. It's 6 pages long, and it has 3 sections. The press release, the customer FAQs, and then you have internal FAQs. As long as you write using this formula, you're gonna get a level of result. And a lot of people feel uncomfortable saying, I'm not a good writer, so I can't write well. And I understand that, but it's not true because most people can write a PRFAQ. You don't need to be a good writer to get started. You just need to get started to get started.
What are some of the common mistakes or anti-patterns that you see people whenever they're adopting PRFAQ?
The first one is really being. Number 2 mistake is, it's kind of silly, but people think of PRFAQ as a
Hello everyone, welcome to a new podcast episode. So today I have with me Marcelo Calbucci. He's the author of the book titled The PRFAQ Framework. Maybe some of you have heard about it, maybe some of you don't, but this framework is popularized or maybe more like come from Amazon, right? So not many people probably have heard about that because it's something that is still kind of like picking up in terms of adoption. So Marcelo today will tell us what is PRFAQ, why it is so powerful inside Amazon, and maybe how can we use that to, start in our work. So Marcelo, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Henry.
Right, Marcelo, in the beginning, I always love to invite my guests to maybe share a little bit more from your career, any turning points that you think we all can learn from you.
Yeah, sure. I started early on when I was a teenager writing software. First for myself, then for my family, then it became a business. And I went to university to study computer science. Shortly after graduating, Microsoft went to Brazil to recruit software engineers to come to the US, work for the company. So I ended up here in Seattle and worked at Microsoft for 7 years. Most of the time there, I worked at Bing. So going to Microsoft was definitely a big shift on my career. Also, leaving Microsoft was a big shift on my career because I became a founder. And for 18 years, I founded and worked on many startups and startup studios, both in the US and in the UK. And 3 years ago, I joined Amazon, which is the opposite of a startup, if you will, a company with more than 1.5 million employees. So it's massive. And as soon as I joined Amazon, I really fell in love with this PRFAQ framework that they invented to discuss strategy and vision. And I really felt that it is going to be useful for founders and product leaders and tech leaders everywhere. So when I left Amazon, I decided to write a book about it, wrote a book and published just a couple months ago. And here am I talking to you about this.
Wow. So I think it's really interesting. You have been in some big tech companies, Microsoft and Amazon, right? And you have gone to, entrepreneurship yourself, founding companies over companies. 18 years, that's a pretty long time. And I'm sure because of that experience, you understand the power of these kind of framework in such big tech companies, right? So PRFAQ framework, maybe in a gist, tell us what is it all about? Or what it is actually. Is it like a product management tool? Is it a project management tool? Or maybe something else?
The PRFAQ is an innovation tool, and it stands for Press Release and Frequently Asked Questions. And the press release is not really a marketing tool. It is a tool to describe a vision. So you write a press release as if the future was already here. So people reading this document can paint this vision and understand what you're trying to do. And it's a 6-page document that has a specific way to write, and there is a specific method on how you create and how you use it as well. So this combined makes up the PRFAQ system, if you will. It was invented by Amazon 20 years ago, and it's used for all kinds of innovations, not only product. But at Amazon, it was used for new businesses, policies, process changes, to add a new service, a program for customers, or an internal program from IT. HR or finance, all kinds of innovations that can be, explained in the form of a vision and strategy. So the way I like to say, to simplify, is that the PRFAQ is a tool for you to discover, debate, and decide on a vision and a strategy for any kind of innovation.
Well, very interesting, description about PRFAQ, right? I think I remember the first time I saw it, I don't know how many years ago. It is kind of like different than, typical artifacts we create for, I don't know, like creating innovations, creating product or business process and things like that. One thing that you mentioned is about, vision, right? There's a forward looking as if it already happens today. So why should we think in terms of future as if it is already happening today? So what's the power in this kind of explanation?
So the PRFAQ, we start from the outcome, right? Like you want to describe what is the opportunity that you're pursuing in terms of the benefits for the customer and for your business. So you paint a vision in the future of, we launch this product and customers are using and they are extracting this benefit and this value from the product, and the business is generating this benefit and this value for itself. So you start from that point on, and then you work backwards to define the strategy and what you need to make that a reality. And part of the PRFAQ is also to describe very clearly and succinctly what are the problems that you're trying to solve, who is the customer, what is the solution, how are customers dealing with that problem today, how they're going to find all those elements that are very important to discuss before you start building or doing anything, right? In a world of like people that are hungry to make things happen, they just jump and start executing without answering some fundamental questions about like, what exactly are we trying to do here?
Wow. So I think, yes, so many techies, including myself, sometimes we are so excited about the idea and we just jump into implementation, building, and share it later and think about, I don't know, all the different details and outcomes. So building sometimes can be a very painful mistakes, right? So I think the most
Yes.
important thing is to think about the outcome first. So you mentioned something about working backwards. So I think it is also very popular methodology from Amazon. Is PRFAQ part of the working backwards framework, or is there anything working in synergy with other methodologies in Amazon?
Working backwards is a practice within Amazon, right? It's almost like a philosophy within Amazon. PRFAQ is a manifestation of that. It is very specific, right? There is a 6-page document. There is a very specific way that you format and style this document, specific ways that you write the content of the document and how you use it. So you can think of PRFAQ as the concrete version of working backwards. Working backwards as a philosophy really means understanding your customer and what you're trying to achieve and working backwards from that. PRFAQ is one way of doing that.
So you mentioned you have seen the power of this framework and you fell in love with it. Why writing a book about it? So is there something that you want to teach to the people outside of the, Amazon?
I think the important thing is to imagine like what is the world without the PRFAQ and what are the problems that we have without the PRFAQ. So what you often have is either people that come up with a solution for something and start building immediately without questioning or like aligning people around them or forcing alignment in a way that is not natural. Or you have people that create like Google Slides and presentations, right? And try to tell the story of a vision and a strategy. And that is always a weak way of presenting a vision and strategy because, when you're doing a presentation, sometimes the charisma of the person or the enthusiasm of the person clouds people's vision of like what this should really be, right? And challenges people in terms of authority or seniority that they don't feel comfortable challenging. So you have to be careful with those systems of creating new things, right? The PRFAQ avoids all of this because first is a written document. And when you're writing, you really think very deeply about what you're writing. So it's not unusual for you to start writing something and pause and realize, oh, wait a second. I actually don't understand this well enough. Let me go do some more understanding of the problem or the solution or the technology or the market or the customer or whatever I need to understand so that I can write a paragraph about it, right? That is very useful. You don't need that when you do PowerPoint. You just put a statement on a PowerPoint and like hope for the best. So writing is a form of thinking, if you will. The other aspect of that is as you write this, you become really good at articulating an idea because your brain like absorbs and recalls the information much better. not only that, but the people reading it are able to provide much richer feedback on what you're doing, right? Versus trying to interrupt you while you're giving a presentation using slides or whatever, right? Or a diagram or anything else. So it helps both sides of the equation, the people coming up with the idea and the people providing feedback on that idea as well. There is one more element, which is often we create PRDs or mini artifacts as a way to sell it or to get buy-in from people into that. PRFAQ is the opposite of that. You're pulling people into collaborating with you to create this document because you're not the expert on everything. And you're going to need many different sides and many different angles to look at this document and help you fill the gaps on what you don't really understand.
Well, I think that's the first very visible distinction, right? So many people, I'm also trained in the industry, seeing people presenting new ideas by using slides, PowerPoint, Google Slides, whatever that is, right? And it depends on the presenter, or maybe the product owner or the owner of the initiative to actually explain what it is all about. And yeah, I mean, we share the slides, but some people might have different interpretation, right? Because slides typically maybe full of visuals and short text, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the first key distinction I can see is that the PRFAQ is a written document. You mentioned 6 pages long. So that means it's kind of like full of narration, right? So people can follow the thought process, or maybe there are certain aspects that we will cover shortly. So I think thanks for pointing that. So one thing also, it seems like not many people adopted like other, big tech giants framework, things like OKR, or maybe PRD, or maybe, MVP Canvas and all that. So why is it not the case for PRFAQ?
Yeah, so I love that you mentioned OKR, right? OKR is somewhat new. Like it's not that old if you think about it. Companies really started adopting OKRs over the last 10 years or so, even less than that. But OKRs have been around for more than 20 years. Like Intel invented OKRs in the 90s, right? And Google adopted OKRs in 98 when it was formed. So it took until 2015 or so for people to really start adopting it. And that was because of some people putting YouTube videos, some people writing books about it, more people writing articles, people learning about it, and like just adopting the framework. I think PRFAQ has been behind because there hasn't been enough content out there or explanations out there of what it is, when to use it, how to use it, and what not to use it for, right? So this is just the beginning of the PRFAQ journey. If you look for PRFAQ content, most of the content has been published in the last 2-3 years. And, it's picking up steam, it's slow, and it's going to take time. But the other aspect of it is PRFAQ is a written document. And a lot of people feel uncomfortable saying, I'm not a good writer, so I can't write one. And I understand that, but it's not true because most people can write a PRFAQ. There is a formula to write a PRFAQ, right? As long as you write using this formula, you're going to get a level of result. You can get better at it. You can be really good at it, but you don't need to be a good writer to get started. You just need to get started to get started. And the first few times that you do it, it's probably not going to be great. So take your time to learn how to do it. The other resistance that I've seen on people not adopting PRFAQ is that they believe people are not going to want to read it. And that is true if you live in an environment of PowerPoint and people don't want to read anything. But once they start seeing the value of reading or the pre-reading a PRFAQ before discussing a meeting, they start to realize, oh, this is very valuable actually, because everyone is talking about the same thing versus, 3 people in a meeting being discussing one topic with the fourth person not realize that they missed an important email or a previous meeting and being completely lost, right? The PRFAQ elevates everyone to the same context.
Yeah, so thanks for mentioning some of the common resistances that people might have in terms of PRFAQ. Sometimes I think, I don't know, I used to work in the startup world. Many people have this bias for action, right? They just want to execute. Maybe, I don't know, the leaders have a bright idea in their mind, right? And they just want to execute it and, fill in the blanks, so to speak, for the other people. So I think writing a document, first of all, some people might think, oh, I need to spend some more time to write it. Or for readers, they also need to spend more time to read about it. So what is your take about this, right? For people who are still thinking that maybe doing the action and speed of execution matters most than, writing this kind of stuff first?
That's a great question. What you have to look at is the total length of a project, not any single activity, right? And not only the total length of the project, the impact and the result of the project for the business. So who cares if you ship something really fast, but like your users didn't care, it didn't deliver any value to your business, maybe even created more risk for your business, right? That's not a good outcome at all. So what I say about the PRFAQ is, yes, it takes a week or two for a normal size project to write and use the PRFAQ. What that's gonna do is gonna reduce more than the amount invested in the total length of the project, because there's gonna be fewer misalignment, fewer needs for coordination. People are gonna be able to make decisions independently because they understand the vision and the strategy without having to sync all the time. There's gonna be fewer emails going around. So the project is gonna move faster with a PRFAQ, even though in the beginning it's gonna feel like this is slow, let's stop this, let's just start building. But you've been there, like all of us have been to projects that were like nightmarish, like that no one agrees, like what exactly are we doing, why we're doing this way. So the PRFAQ avoids a lot of that. It doesn't eliminate. It's important to say that. There is no guarantee that a project is going to be successful, but it reduces the chance of failure, at least on the most basic cases.
So I think we have built people's anticipation to learn about this PRFAQ. So let's dive deep into what is PRFAQ. Like you mentioned, right? It's not just like some, 6-page long document that people can just write in any kind of a way. So I think there's a certain methodology, there's a certain constraints actually that is being put in as part of the framework. So maybe let's start, what are some important stuffs, the main sections of PRFAQ, so that we can actually understand it better.
So let's start with the document artifact, right? Or the PRFAQ template. That's how it's called by some people. It's 6 pages long and it has 3 sections. The first section is the press release, which is the first page. The second section is the customer FAQs, which is the second page. And then you have 4 pages of internal FAQs. And the first 2 sections, the press release and the customer FAQs, you write as if the future is already here, right? You write in the present tense as if the product or the program or the business already exists. So you're painting a picture of a future state that you wish it was true. And the 4 internal FAQ pages, you write in the present tense with the knowledge that you have today, just like you would write any kind of business document, right? And you really describe several elements of the idea, which is the problem, the solution, the go-to-market, the risks, the mitigations, the feasibility aspects of this innovation. Like, do you need some data? Do you need some APIs? Do you need some technology to be tested? The viability, which is the financial aspect, the cost, the operational, the maintenance. It's all part of the viability. You also talk about the value, which is very important, right? Like you want to create something that is of value for a customer and of value for your business. So you have to make sure that the 2 things are coming together nicely. It can't be just something that is great for the customer, but terrible for the business, or great for the business and terrible for the customer. So that all gets included in the internal FAQ. You have also an optional appendix. And in the appendix, you might include a few elements like financial modeling, wireframes, or a diagram, or some user research that you've done. But you have to be very careful because these things are magnets for discussions, right? And what you really want people discussing is the first 6 pages, which represents the vision and the strategy, not the tactics or the plan.
So after you mention all of this, right, it seems like it covers a lot of ground, right? So in terms of, the customer, the problem, right, the value, the feasibility, the financial aspect and things like that, right? Although there are main sections that are kind of like advocated, right? The PR, right? The press release, and then the customer FAQ, and then the internal FAQ with the optional appendix. So it seems like it covers a lot. 6 page. How to fit all of them in, to me, such a short document for covering a lot of grounds.
Yeah, 6 pages is ideal because it takes a person usually 20 minutes to read 6 pages. And what happens is if you have a 1-hour meeting, you can ask everyone to read the 6 pages during the first 20 minutes, and then you have 40 minutes to debate and to discuss and to decide. And that's a very powerful formula. It's a good combo. So if you do it shorter, you're probably not going to be able to capture everything that you want. If you do it longer, then you become sloppy, right? You might decide to include too much information. The 6 page put a constraint on what you write so that you're really focusing on what matters for that conversation. What I say is the PRFAQ is the tool for you to decide if you should do a project or not. So it's what you do before day one of the project, right? And for that to be a good conversation, you should not be talking about the details. You should be talking about the big picture. The details is once you start a project, when the project gets funding or green lighted to go ahead and start, right? And then you can do the full planning of the tactics and the dates and the roadmap and everything else. But the PRFAQ really should be focused on the high-level elements of vision and strategy, and you focus on that. So you can fit that in 6 pages. It's possible. I've done many times. I see many PRFAQs that do that. Sometimes it's hard. And then you have to decide what to cut, right? What is not important for us to be deciding right now that would not have an impact in our ability to decide or not to do this project.
Right. Thanks for clarifying. The emphasis, right, is actually to make decision, right, to do the, decision making. So it should cover just the high level thing, not the super detailed stuff, because otherwise 6 page won't fit. And I think there's another powerful thing that I also learned when reading the book, right? This thing called the precise writing. So for you to actually, write in a short, concise manner, definitely there are techniques, right? So I think in your book, you mentioned this thing called precise writing, which I think is kind of like the adopted way of writing in Amazon. So tell us what is precise writing, because I really think this is one powerful thing that anyone can do in terms of improving their writing.
Yes, I agree with you. It's very important. It's not only applicable to PRFAQ, even if you write emails or Slack messages or PRDs or any other kind of document, you should be using precise writing, full stop. It's that important. So let's define precise writing and what is not, right? So there's two other types of writing that you can imagine. One is that marketing, sales language way of writing. We are the best, we're going to build the fastest, and everything feels like very abstract, like not very specific. And when you read content like that, at the end, you feel like, I think I understand, but I'm not sure if I understand or not. And like, I'm not sure I believe it or not. So end up being in that world. The other extreme is technical writing, right? So when you read those white papers and like explaining very details of the technology, but it misses the point of like the story of the user and how this is good for them and how they're going to interact with it and why this is going to be valuable for the business as well. So precise writing is what happens in between, right? So you use the right elements of data with the right elements of storytelling. And you combine that in a way of writing that people can resonate with. They can understand what they are talking about. So in the book, for example, I give an example of solar panels. You can talk about solar panels in a very scientific way, right? How many watts per hour they can generate per square meter of surface area, depending on the latitude of the house, yada, yada. That's very scientific, very specific and technical, right? Or you can write like solar panels are great for the environment and they are wonderful and everyone wants to buy one. And like, yeah, okay, like help me make business decisions here, right? The precise writing is in the middle, is when you explain the impact of solar power in the livelihood of someone, right? How much money are they going to save on their house? How much is going to cost for them? How much energy they can generate out of their monthly expend from solar powers? Like that's the middle point, right? And in the book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to precise writing so people can grasp what it is. The other aspect of precise writing that is very important is to make things clear. So you avoid the abbreviations, the jargons, you explain concepts in simple terms, you make it concise because very long sentences are very hard for people to read. So you eliminate all the redundancy on the sentences to make it really, really concise and clear for people to read.
Yeah, so I think people should learn about this precise writing because just through the examples you mentioned in the book, right? The paragraphs, the sentences, I can really see the power of if people try to adopt it in their writing, it will be more powerful. So things like, remove fluffy words, remove weak terms, those kind of stuff. and also use something that is more specific, like what you mentioned, right? Not something like, okay, this thing is the coolest thing ever. Like how cool? How do you describe the cool thing, right? So I think those kind of things definitely is a part of the precise writing that should be adopted in PRFAQ, right? And the other thing is, I think because of all these so-called methodologies and maybe, I don't know, like the way that you write the PRFAQ, right? It has to be following a certain, if not to say strict guidelines. So why such a strict way of writing the document, right? Is it something for consistency, standardization, or is it something else?
Yeah, like you said, it's for consistency, right? Because you are helping the reader. If your organization is going to adopt PRFAQ, people are going to feel more comfortable if from document to document, it follows the same pattern, right? And the same style of writing. And that helps you consume the information faster. So you can imagine like someone that has a artifact on their organization that has a template at the top that describe, I don't know, cost and timeline and everything. And like every document that they use has that template on the top. That makes it easier for anyone on that organization to see one of those documents and find exactly what they're looking for. So part of the structure of the PRFAQ is to help you with that, right? Like how can I absorb the information correctly and fast so I can help provide feedback and make decisions?
Totally makes sense, right? So I think standardization, because I've read so many documents as well, and if different authors write differently in a different kind of structure, I think it's can be quite difficult to actually compare one against the other. That's the first thing. And second thing is we always have to switch, like the context in our mind, how to interpret a document that you read. So I think it's really powerful structure. So that's why I think I understand why it has these three main sections: the PR, press release, the customer FAQ, and the internal FAQ. Let's maybe dive into each of them. The press release. Are you referring press release something like, we see in all these TechCrunch blogs or maybe in the news whenever people, release something, they want to do this press release? Is it actually the same?
It is the same, but it's not. So it is the same in the context that it should read like a press release that you would send to the press. However, on the PRFAQ, the press release has a very specific structure as well. It has 7 paragraphs that you write in a very specific way. So it makes it easy for even someone who never wrote a PRFAQ, a press release, to write a press release. And it tells the story starting from the problem, the solution. It includes some fictional quotes from the team and fictional quotes from the customer. It includes an explanation of how to get started, includes an explanation of how it works, all very briefly, right? So what I say is the press release is to prime everyone reading the document on what's to come. So when you start reading the rest of the document, you are already in a state of mind that you say like, oh, I know what we're talking about. So you start evaluating each of the FAQ section in a better state. The other thing that I was going to say about the press release is that it's not a marketing tool. And I mentioned that in the beginning of the podcast. You're never going to send this to the press, ever. It's a confidential product document or a business document. So you keep within the organization, so you're happy to write whatever you think it's important to tell that story.
Yeah, I think it's important not to leak this because otherwise people will think you are releasing something concrete, right? So what you mentioned about press release, right? As if like you're sending it to the press. I think every time I read this press release, there's this definite structure that you just mentioned, right? So a company is releasing something, there's a problem, right? And there are quotes as well. Why do you think that this kind of powerful structure, right? Like people are using it all the time to do press release. Why including all these aspects in a press release, actually?
To write the book, I spent some time studying press releases and where it came from and why it became so powerful. The interesting thing about press release is that it's a standard document or a standard format adopted by the press and by comms team, marketing communication team within organizations, so they can quickly share information with each other, right? So if I want to tell a story of a crisis of a new product launch or a new hire in my organization and I send a press release to a journalist, like I'm putting in a format that journalists know how to consume really quickly because it's going to contain all the key information that a journalist needs. So that's why Amazon adopted as well. Why reinvented something that already was very powerful in a way to capture stories about a new product or a new business or a change.
Yeah, so indeed, it's really powerful after I read it in your chapter, right? So I think why it all makes sense, adopting press release kind of structure way of writing. And I think one key aspect about this PR is as well the narration, right? So the storytelling aspect of it. So tell us why we have to adopt storytelling narration instead of other, descriptive manner, I guess.
The storytelling helps with many aspects. One that we talk about is like to think clearly. Like it's really hard for us to tell a story if the story is not coherent. And if you're going to talk about a new product and you can't tell a coherent story about a new product, it's a strong signal there is something off here, right? More likely than not, it's not that you're not a good storyteller, it's that this product doesn't have a good story. So you should go back to the drawing board and think like, are we actually solving a real customer problem that we talk with customers and we really understand? Is our solution adequate to solve that problem? Because if you're writing a story in the format of a press release and it doesn't feel coherent, there is something off. So you need to look at it from that perspective. And as such, is a powerful tool to help you think and identify the gaps on what you're trying to do, right? And that alone adds a lot of value to the PRFAQ, creates a lot of value by the PRFAQ.
So I think, yeah, very powerful storytelling format. I think it's not just in writing PRFAQ. I think in your presentation, in explaining something to the people so that they can get the coherent aspect that you mentioned, right? Or what you're trying to convey. I think storytelling seems like everyone is adopting it. Movies, writing documents, books, whatever that is. I think it's really powerful concept. So I think in a press release, we kind of like understand what should happen. I think the other aspect of press release that I find can be really useful is the, building the vision, trying to build the anticipation of, releasing something, right? I think people can get
Yes.
excited just by reading press release. I think that's one aspect that I feel can be very useful as well. So the other aspect, the next section is the customer FAQ. I think if
Yes.
I read press release, sometimes it is not followed by FAQs in the typical press release. Why do we create this customer FAQ, which typically is mentioned in the website or somewhere, right? So why putting a customer FAQ as part of the document?
The customer FAQ helps define the strategy that you're going after, right? So you can imagine a customer FAQ is, how much is this going to cost? Can I import my data? Like, where do I get started? And as you answer those questions, it's useful for the team that's going to be involved in building it to understand what exactly we are building. Because pricing, for example, can affect the viability or the feasibility of a project. If you say like this product is going to be free to our users, like everyone is going to think differently than it's going to cost $3 a month. And even the fact that you say it's going to cost $2 a month, immediately you're going to get your engineering team and your UX team and your product team thinking about, all right, so you need to have billing. So you need to accept credit card or payment. So you need to build this whole thing. So it's helping inform people on elements of the strategy and how they need to think about this new project, this new initiative.
So when you paint this FAQ, right, do you actually involve real potential customers? Or is it like the owner of the initiatives plays the customer's head? Is there a better way of coming up with these FAQs?
You involve the customers in the sense that you should be talking to them. They're not going to be reading the document. You might not even be telling them exactly what you're doing, but you need to learn from them about their problem, about how they are solving today, about how they found the solution today, what it would take for them to move from one solution to another solution, what is not satisfying them about how they are solving it today. There's many things there that I'm not going to elaborate everything here. The book includes a lot of that. So that is the extent that you talk with customers. They should not be reading your PRFAQ the same way customers should not be reading your PRDs or any other confidential document within the organization.
Yeah, so typically in the product world, right, people use these persona or jobs to be done. In your book, you actually mentioned that you prefer using jobs to be done framework instead of using personas. So maybe briefly tell us why is the case.
Yeah, this is a longer conversation. We would need a whole podcast about this, right? But personas was invented maybe 40 or 50 years ago. I don't know how long ago. And it was mostly a marketing tool, right? So you could understand how to create campaigns that target certain traits of a person, right? Like a married man or like a child who lives in this neighborhood. And slowly personas made it their way into product, right? Because we had no other tools of doing things. So it's not unusual for UX teams, for product managers to establish some personas for the product they're building. And then from there, trying to define the features they're going to build. I think that's backwards, right? The best approach, and by the way, this is what Jobs to be Done has been discussed by Clayton Christensen and Tony Wilwick, and many people who wrote books about jobs to be done. There's excellent books out there, which is, it doesn't matter who your customer is. What matters is what they're trying to do, right? If you're trying to hang a frame to the wall, just to give a very typical example, like it doesn't matter any of the other elements of and attributes of your life. What we care is you're trying to hang a frame to the wall. Can we solve the problem with a drill and hooks, or with stick tapes, or whatever, right? So if your product is about that, you're defining the jobs to be done, which is what the customer is trying to do, and the solution that you're going to provide to that. And the framework is wonderful. I really think it's great. It's fantastic. It doesn't address everything. There are some gaps there around desirability. For some products, it's a little bit harder to be very clear on how you use jobs to be done. But in general, I think it's a much better place for product teams that are considering creating something new to start from, or programs or services or businesses.
Right. Thanks for clarifying that. So I think we can move to the next section, right? So again, just to recap, customer focus FAQ, right? Maybe it's like 6, 8 FAQs that you include there. It's something that a hypothetical customer would ask if they read your press release, right? So the first press release and customer FAQ, they kind of like interrelated, and both are kind of like future forward looking, right? The next section is internal FAQs, and you mentioned this is not necessarily forward looking. So tell us what is this internal only FAQ? I mean, the main subject itself is kind of like weird, right? Why you built an FAQ for internal teams?
Yeah, so the internal FAQ is the most important part of the PRFAQ. And actually, when you start writing your PRFAQ, you start from the internal FAQ. You don't start from the press release and customer FAQ. You start from the internal FAQ first. So it's kind of odd because you start from the internal FAQ first, then you write your customer FAQs, then last you write the press release. But of course, you read it from top to bottom when you are providing feedback to someone else's PRFAQ. The internal FAQ is a way to explain strategy in terms of the feasibility, the viability, the usability, and the value that you are creating. So you're answering questions for the team as if the questions were being asked by the team. That's why it's called internal FAQ. So you can imagine, like, maybe your manager comes to you and is like, what problem are we trying to solve? Well, that's a great question to include on the internal FAQ. So, and actually it's my recommended first question that people should answer, like, what problem are we trying to solve? And then you answer, like, this is the problem that we're trying to solve. You don't talk about the solution. You talk about the customer problem. Like, customers are trying to hang frames to the wall. That's the problem that we're trying to solve. So you focus on that. And then you include several questions. It can be anywhere from 12 to 18 to 20 questions that help people understand all these elements, right? Like, what are we trying to do? Why we're trying to do? What is the problem? What is the solution? How customers going to find it? What have we done so far? How do we know this is true? Like, all those kind of questions. And in the book, I have more than 60 questions that people can pick and choose from. And of course, at the end of the day, you're going to have to adapt to your needs, right? There's going to be things that are very specific to your organization. So it could be that you're replacing an existing solution within your organization already. So you might need to have an internal FAQ that explains, like, how we're going to replace and migrate the data from X to Z, right? You don't need to go into the details, but you need to say, like, the team has evaluated this solution and has tested the ability to do this, and we're going to use this tool or framework or technology to do that. That's enough for the strategy conversation. So that's what the internal FAQ includes.
Right. Very interesting. You mentioned that we should start by writing the internal FAQ first, followed by customer FAQ, and the last is press release, right? So I think I can understand why it is powerful to start with internal FAQ first. I think similar kind of question, like, how do you come up with the questions, right? Do you involve the different various teams, maybe the leaders from those teams, to actually come and maybe ask the questions itself upfront so that the owner of the initiative can come up with the answer? Or is there any other way of writing the internal FAQs?
Yeah, the easiest way is probably to read the book and pick the questions from my book, right? But independent of that, you're right. Like as you review this document with some people, they're going to ask you new questions that are very strategically important that you haven't included. Some are going to be tactical, right? They're going to ask you about like, hey, are we going to use this cloud provider or that cloud provider? That is tactical. You don't need to include that. Unless it is not tactical, it's strategic in the sense that that decision is going to have implications for the partnerships the organization has. So that is strategic, not tactical. So as people ask you certain questions, you have to make a judgment. Is this relevant for us to make a decision, or can we talk about that later? If it is like, we can talk about that later after we make a decision, you don't include it. If it is important to make a decision, you include it. So that's how you come up with newer questions that you can add to the internal FAQs.
Right. The strategic aspect part, I think, is really interesting, right? Because if, for example, we are building, I don't know, like a technical products, how much level of technical details should be included? Or if, let's say, it's a project about, I don't know, migrating something, right? Again, how much level of the, technical details and steps that we need to include, right? And maybe marketing strategies, how much, details in terms of campaign. So I think sometimes it can be really difficult to actually understand about those kind of projects without actually knowing the level of details. So how should you balance these details with the strategic and concise manner of the FAQs?
So it depends on what you're using the PRFAQ for, right? PRFAQ is for any kind of innovation. So it could be for a new product, new feature, but also it could be for internal services and tools. And that can mean both like IT and HR and finance and legal, who need to change a process or change a vendor or change a tool that they use or implement a new tool for themselves, but also like platform teams and core technology teams and other teams that are building like infrastructure tools for other engineering teams to use. So in that case, what an engineering team can do is to imagine the other team as their customer. So they write the PRFAQ in a funny way. It reads funny. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a press release. On that case, could be an email or a blog post announcing the new infrastructure. So let's say you're moving from one database technology to another database technology. So the announcement itself is now we are making available for the front-end engineering teams to access the data from this new database that we're using. I even include an example like that on my book about how to use for internal tech projects. And on that case, the customer FAQs are employees of the organization. So the customers are employees of the organization. So you don't need the customer FAQs. You can just like get rid of that section, right? Like everything is an internal FAQ because your customer is part of your team. So you can share that information directly with them. And on that case, how you define strategy is slightly different, right? It's more about the interfaces and the contracts that are going to be exposing to other teams versus the customer product that you're building for an external customer.
Thanks for clarifying that. So I think we have covered the 3 sections. The last section is the optional one, which is Appendix. One thing that I find really interesting, you mentioned that we can put Appendix is optional, but you should not expect people to read it or dig deeper into it. So maybe tell us any reason, this kind of specificity about Appendix.
Depending on the size of the project that you're working on, it might involve a lot of functions in your organization. So you might have marketing and sales and UX and product management and engineering and machine learning teams and everything else that you can imagine, like every other function under the sun. So sometimes it's good to have some elements that is a little bit deeper so these functions can comment on it. So let's talk about finance, for example. You might be reviewing your PRFAQ with the finance team. They want to know like how much this is going to cost, what is the revenue, what kind of modeling have you done. If you include that in the first 6 pages, it's going to be a lot. And it's going to be really hard for the other people to extract the value that they need from it. So you might include a page on financial modeling on the appendix, right? And then when you're reviewing the PRFAQ with the finance team, you say, read the PRFAQ and read Appendix C that has a financial model, right? And then they're going to be able to read the entire strategy and vision, but go one level deeper on what matters to them. Same thing for engineering, for UX, for product, for other elements. So you might include diagrams of an architecture if that's really important to include to make a strategic decision again. You might include some mocks and wireframes of what you consider to be building so that it helps the UX team understand what's going on, or even the results of UX research that has been done so far.
Right. I think we have the full picture now about PRFAQ. Thanks for painting it in such a detailed manner, right? So I think some people might be really interested in adopting this, right? So I think maybe we should advise people how to get started, right? So is there a way that people can start? Maybe there are some examples that are publicly available that we can follow. Is there any more contents maybe from you that we can follow in terms of, trying to learn and practice the PRFAQ?
Absolutely. Yes. Actually, if you go to my website and you can go to Google and search for PRFAQ book, and you're going to find the book website, I actually put a few examples there so people can read this. And that's where I recommend people get started, right? Read a few PRFAQs so you understand what the thing is about. And then on the website, I have lots of resources, including templates for people to download and try to practice the PRFAQ, or even buy the book and read it.
Right. One aspect when we try to adopt best practices from other companies or big tech giants, right, is the importance of context. Do you think this PRFAQ will work outside of Amazon? And if so, what is the most important thing that actually affects the success of PRFAQ adoption?
So my book is an adaptation of Amazon's PRFAQ. The way Amazon does PRFAQ is slightly different than what I describe in the book, because Amazon is a very resourceful organization. It has a lot of money, it has a lot of people, it has a lot of time to make like really big decisions that only going to have an impact 2 years from now. Most organizations don't have that kind of resource or that timeline or that mindset. So the reason I adapted the Amazon way is so that anyone could do a PRFAQ in 1 or 2 weeks, which is a reasonable amount of time if you're going to invest 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months in a project, right? And I do think it's very useful for even if you're just a single person, right? Like you're a solo entrepreneur or solo founder, the PRFAQ helps you give you clarity as you think about, as you're writing and identifying the gaps on your knowledge and your critical thinking. The PRFAQ is going to forces you to like get clarity on it and learn how to articulate it better. So people ask me like, hey, should founders use PRFAQ to get investors? And I say, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you write your PRFAQ. And by the act of writing the PRFAQ, even if you use a presentation later, you're going to be much better at articulating your vision and your story in a way that's going to resonate with investors. So it works on that setting, but it also works in any big company. My only recommendation is that people don't start PRFAQ with a very big project. If it is the first one that you're doing, pick a small project with a reasonable number of people, maybe 5 or 10 people in the organization. Tell everyone this is an experiment, that you're going to give it a try. I pretty much guarantee that the first time you try is going to be wrong. So try again and try again. No one gets it right the first time. It doesn't matter if it has PRFAQs or OKRs or PRDs or any other framework. It takes some time for you to learn it. So use it 3 to 4 times before you really understand what's going on and feel comfortable using it.
Yeah, and one aspect that is really important is the writing skills, right? So again, this is a written narrative document, right? So you should also improve in terms of writing skills, and also the culture in the team or organization should be, valuing written artifacts rather than, just the presentation slides. So I think that's also important. So you mentioned that people will make mistakes adopting this framework in the very beginning. What are some of the common mistakes or anti-patterns that you see people, start whenever they adopting PRFAQ?
The first one is really being too tactical in your PRFAQ and including a plan and roadmaps and detailed feature lists and lots of wireframes. Don't go there, right? PRFAQs are about strategy and vision. Stay on that realm for as long as you can so everyone can be aligned on the desired outcome that the team is going after. That's number one. Number 2 mistake is it's kind of silly, but people think of PRFAQ as what you do at the end of a project, right? So you're going to be ready to announce. So you write the press release, you write the FAQs, and then you announce it. No, It's not for that. It's for the decision. It's for early on. So these are two very common mistakes that I see happening.
Yeah, I can really understand the last one, right? People think it's about announcing the product, right? But actually, it should be
Yes.
used for decision making before you actually decide to embark on, the thing that you are planning for in the PRFAQ. So we have covered a lot
Yeah.
of things. Is there anything that you think we should also cover today, but I haven't really asked? So is there anything from you, Marcelo?
The one thing I would say is to use a PRFAQ effectively in your organization, the people reading the PRFAQ also need to learn how to provide good feedback. And I even have a free chapter that people can download from their website as well of how to provide feedback. Because if you're not being effective in providing feedback, you are reducing the value of the PRFAQ. Because PRFAQ is a collaboration mechanism. And you want everyone to understand their role as they provide feedback.
Right. I think that's a very important, right? If people read but no feedback given, right? I think there will be less powerful aspect of this. And as you mentioned, it's the collaboration aspect, right? So that's why we include things like the customer FAQ, the internal FAQ, that is actually to cover, different perspectives so that your idea gets more powerful, right? And you can get the buy-in from various different parts of the organization. So, Marcelo, really love the conversation. Really appreciate the book that you write, the PRFAQ Framework, right? So, as we reach the end of our conversation, I have one last question for you today. A question that I call the three technical leadership wisdom. So, think of it just like advice that you want to give to us, the listeners here. Maybe if you can share your version of the wisdom.
Yeah, I'll share that the first wisdom is fall in love with the problem, not the solution. There are multiple solutions to a problem, and once you really understand the problem, you're going to be able to provide better solutions for it. And that applies to everything, right? Not only customer problems, but internal problems as well. The second one is remember that everything that we do is with and about people. Your customers are people, your team members are people, your vendors are people. So if you understand behavior science and intercommunication and interpersonal skills, you can really advance, your initiatives. The third one is really people need to learn how to articulate their thoughts more clearly. Because if you have a good idea or if you have good intentions, but you don't know how to explain them well, it's really hard for other people to support you and to rally behind you.
Wow, that's really powerful, right? Because I really can vouch so many bright people, right? Bright ideas, but not able to articulate their vision, their ideas better to other people, right? Unless it's a solo project where you can do it maybe all by yourself. But I think most of the big impact projects, you require other people to work with, right? So I think thanks for mentioning that. So Marcelo, if people would love to, follow up with you, ask you questions, or maybe go to your resources, maybe is there a place where they can find you online?
The easiest way is to go to Google, search for PRFAQ book, find the book website. The author page has all my contact information, including my email address.
Thanks so much. I'll put that in show notes. So thanks again for your time today, Marcelo.
Thank you, Henry.